Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the meeting of the Audit Committee for Thursday, I think it is, March 25th, 2021. Special meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order. We would normally do a run through of everybody's video and audio, but I see most people and I have heard most people, so I think we're good. So I'd like to move ahead with the approval of the minutes of August 19th, 2020. So I'm wondering if I could have a mover and a seconder for the minutes of August 19th, 2020.
So moved, Mr. Chair. I'll second.
Great, thank you. Councillor Daigle-Gammon moves and Councillor Purdy seconds. Any error?
Well, you're the only one that's present that were at that meeting, so you should tell us if it's accurate or not.
I did not see any errors or omissions. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And does anybody else see any errors or omissions in those minutes? Wonderful. Thank you. In that case, everybody, all in favor of the minutes of August 19th, 2020, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Wonderful. Thank you. The minutes carry. On to the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions, and over to the clerk. Do we have anything for today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we do not have any additions for the order of business today.
Okay. Thank you. In that case, can I have a motion to approve the order of business and additions and deletions?
Councillor Cleary moves the order of business without amendments.
The order of business, and a seconder for that, please.
Second it.
Seconded by Councillor Hensby. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay, thank you. We do have two new committee members with us this morning. We have Claude Carter and Carolyn Deschênes. And I would simply like to make mention that they are the members of the public who have joined us to sit on this committee. And if you would like to say a few things introducing yourself and describing your background, and just give us a very brief sense of who you are and what brought you to the committee, you are more than welcome to do so. So, Carolyn, if you're interested, or...
Sure. Yes, my name is Carolyn Deschênes. I'm SVP at the NSLC, and I've worked here for many years. So I'm aware of provincial budget. Municipality is new to me, so I did a little bit of digging this week just to refresh my memory from school. Yeah, so my background mostly in government accounting. My interest, I want to get involved in a different way. I'm already sitting on a non-for-profit French daycare board. And I just saw this opportunity and went for it. So
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for committing the time to it. I appreciate that. Claude. Okay.
Claude, you got your camera and microphone off. He's a little shy. I know Claude from the old Bridge Commission days.
I'm wagering Claude may have stepped away from his computer for a minute, so that's fair. At this point, moving ahead with the agenda, call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Hearing none. We have the audit of the consolidated financial statements of HRM 2021. And we have a presentation by Carrie Blair with KPMG and Greg Allen, the audit manager at KPMG. So over to you.
Thanks. I hope you can hear me, everyone.
We can.
Great. I just had to switch microphones because I realized the other one was going to die partway through. Maybe that would have been not a bad thing to keep me quiet sooner. We prepared. Greg can't be with us today. This is obviously our one of our relatively busy times, so I've excused him from attending this meeting in lieu of his work schedule and need to meet some other client deadlines. But he sends his regards and did look forward to being here today. I will quickly run through the presentation that is in front of you. Tried to inject a little bit of color and life by putting a picture of some swings in a park that we hope will be filled quite soon with kids getting out and enjoying the great weather we've had. The purpose of this report, if I scroll down to the fourth page, purpose of this report is really to inform the committee of our audit plan for the current fiscal year of the HRM. We have considered a number of factors in doing our preliminary planning process, including the impacts COVID-19 has had on the HRM as an organization. More so from a financial point of view than any other area, to see if there are any public sector accounting issues that may come to light that need to be discussed and considered that we haven't normally had to consider in prior years. The audit of the HRM is a consolidated audit under public sector accounting standards, and we do have a number of components that we consider. We've provided some detail as to which components are considered significant or material to the financial results and therefore are within the scope of our audit. We've also provided a bit of detail around how we determine audit materiality. The group materiality for this year is 14.5 million on an operating budget or a budget that, when adjusted for public sector accounting standard principles, we believe would be roughly just over $1 billion of expenditures for the year. We've also outlined in our presentation sort of the quality control as well as proposed fees, which are consistent with fees that we would have normally incurred under the contract that back when we won the RFP. So scroll on to just speak briefly about COVID-19. I think as I've heard from a lot, we've spoken a lot about this in our normal day-to-day lives. I'm sure at this committee, it's been an important topic. Some of the areas, by way of example, that we've considered is whether there are any property tax deferral or payment programs and how those might be accounted for, and what risks may be financially may exist that need to be considered, such as non-payment. Any incentives that maybe have been given out to, and whether they've been appropriately accounted for. We've seen a number of items such as lease deferrals require some special consideration from the accounting standards point of view. New government transfers that are in place, impacts on the assumptions that go into the determination of employee benefits is certainly one thing that has been top of mind, and there are a number of actuarial calculations that are included in the financial statements of the HRM that need to consider whether there is an impact there. So all these things have been factored into our audit plan. We have considered also whether working remotely, as many of the staff members have been at the HRM for an extended period of time now, I guess just over a year, whether those create any changes in the financial reporting processes, whether there are still the same level of controls, or whether the controls are have been somewhat changed to accommodate remote working. Some of the areas that we also consider would be more at the entity level control area, where there might be less oversight where you're working remotely, and therefore create a potential for people to become disconnected and not as in tune with the general focus that the organization has over financial reporting controls. So we've considered all of those factors in developing this plan, which is outlined on page 3. sort of the areas where we, from an audit point of view, have touched on. Page 4 is a little bit of information that just talks about our audit and how we perform quality audits within our profession. You know, we believe that the utmost purpose of us as auditors is to ensure that we are transparent and provide quality audits where we apply all of the professional standards that are required, including independence, and are ethical in our approach to doing our audits. And it's all, our audits are all focused around the one goal, which is to perform quality engagements. Page 5 is where I mentioned that we talk a bit more about the group scope. And I'll just talk a little bit about the target that's on the left-hand side. Really what this is designed is to help the committee visualize how involved we at HR or at KPMG are in the audit of the HRM. The outer ring would really represent the totality of the financial statements, and I believe it's measured based on expenditures of the HRM. The inner ring would represent who is responsible in the course of our audit for those components. Dark blue on the outer rim representing things that are financially significant, that we've identified as financially significant. So there's two components, being the actual city operations, which we define as the standalone HRM financial information before consolidation. And then there would be the regional, or Halifax Regional Water Commission would be the other significant component that is 100% incorporated into the results of the HRM through a modified equity accounting method. There is also 4 components that represent entities that, when in aggregate, would add up to something that we consider to be somewhat significant and have similar risks, and we do some level of procedures over those particular entities, those being the Scotiabank Centre, Halifax Regional Library, Halifax Forum, and the Canada Game Centre. So we would be involved with doing procedures over those. The only entity that is within sort of our scope or material significant tests that we don't do work over directly is the Halifax Regional Water Commission, which is audited by Grant Thornton, and we engage through the auditing standards with Grant Thornton to direct them in the key risks that we would expect that they do, and ensure that they're performing their responsibilities, not just as the auditors of the Halifax Regional Water Commission, but also as a component auditor of the Halifax Regional Municipality, and they report directly to us to provide us with the comfort that we have appropriate sufficient audit evidence over that entity. Sub-bullet note 2 there gives a listing of all the entities, and there's 16 of them that we really don't spend any time looking at. These are relatively small entities that don't have significant expenses at the end of the day, and are often quite routine in nature, so that they're consistently spending the same amount of money year over year based on a budget allocation, and there is little to no financial reporting risk left for us to consider. In terms of audit risks, the next 2 pages, 6 and 7 of our report, deal with the required professional standards within auditing that we have to consider. One is a risk of material statement due to fraud resulting from fraudulent revenue recognition. This is a presumed risk that can be rebutted. We have rebutted this risk because we don't believe revenue, as defined under public sector accounting standards, is something that is a key metric of the HRM. It certainly is important to understand property taxes and where some of the other auxiliary revenues are coming from, but there is no incentive or risk that management would manipulate revenue that we've identified to ensure that there are favorable results at the end of the day of the consolidated financial statements of the HRM. With respect to page 7, we talk about the presumed risk of management override of controls. That presumed risk is something we can't rebut, and this is simply the fact that management is in a unique position to influence or potentially override controls, and therefore any amount of process level control testing we do would not identify the weakness because they've circumvented the normal processes. So in doing these procedures, we typically are focused on where and why management may override controls, and the typical point in a process where they would be around journal entries. And so we've designed specific risk characteristics to identify journal entries that are made throughout the year that could represent a override of controls, and look to find evidence as to why those journal entries have been made and what the rationale is. The other area would be if we come across any significant unusual transactions, so things that are out of the normal, things that are not routinely dealt with at the HRM by management, we'd look to see if there's any bias in either the accounting for those transactions, or if there are estimates required biased in setting those estimates that may suggest that management has influenced a certain outcome. Other routine areas that are not specific to a significant risk, but certainly significant in terms of their importance from an audit perspective, would be the routine areas of the financial statements, which would include taxation revenues, which is an HRM component issue, user fees and charges, which would be in place both at the HRM and at the rec facilities. The capitalization of assets, so determining whether an expenditure meets the definition to be capitalized as part of tangible capital assets or should be expensed, is certainly an important area for us to consider. And we do design procedures as outlined in our approach to ensure the completeness, existence, and accuracy of all the transactions that are represented in those categories. Page 9 furthers the list of areas that we focus on. Payroll expenditures, which would exist both within the HRM and the significant rec facilities that we've identified. Routine expenses, certain routine expenses. So we do look at where non-payroll related expenditures are made, in particular where significant contracts are in place, or there's a significant amount of spend, and we do substandard procedures over those routine expenses. And treasury is a bit of a catch-all, but it includes really cash management at the end of the day, which is done at the HRM level. So it's cash borrowings that are significant, as well as short-term investments that are significant to the HRM. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we rely on Grant Thornton to perform procedures that would give us the comfort that the equity pickups and recognition of the investment in the Halifax Regional Water Commission is complete and accurate. That is, they do those procedures throughout the course of their statutory audit that they do for the Halifax Regional Water Commission, and we provide direction and they confirm that they can comply with that direction. And we also would perform some oversight by reviewing some of the working papers that they've accumulated to support their opinion to ensure it's sufficient and appropriate. As I mentioned, materiality is on the next page, page 11. It's set at 14.5 million. It's slightly down from the prior year, and that's really just more of a factor of wanting to reduce the percentage of the benchmark that we use to take into account that there may be some risks around COVID-19. It's not a significant change because I believe the benchmark's up a little bit year over year in terms of what we've used to set the materiality. Although last year we did use total expenses, we noted that we would have used a slightly lower number than what actually came in. And in looking at how we determined what the projected expenses were for the current year to base our benchmark, we looked at one, the most recent approved budget amounts, and then we would have reconciled out some of the non-public sector accounting amounts and factored in items that should be accounted for under public sector accounting that would change those numbers. And as I mentioned before, it's just slightly over $1 billion that we would project the benchmark to be. If you look at it in terms of other relevant benchmarks, we could look at it from a total assets perspective. So a materiality of 14.5 million is 0.6% of the total assets of the HRM. Also, we could look at it on an accumulated surplus point of view. So what is it as a percentage of accumulated surplus? And it would be 0.7% of accumulated surplus. Both of those benchmarks would suggest that they're within a relevant and appropriate range. We have set some benchmark metrics internally at KPMG to ensure that we're consistent when we apply these benchmarks. And typically with a gross benchmark, we look for the range to be within 0.5% all the way up to 3%, depending on the nature of the entity. And when we look at net benchmarks, which would be consistent with your accumulated surplus, we're really looking for that benchmark to be no greater than 2%. And so it's underneath that benchmark. We think 14.5 million is really an appropriate materiality for an organization this size. Obviously, when we do our work, that is an aggregate materiality. We then disaggregate it into separate components depending on either the type of expenditure or revenue we are looking at, or even with respect to some of the entities. So we would communicate a much lower materiality to the Halifax Regional Water Commission to ensure that any errors that are identified at a smaller level of materiality, so that in aggregate, when we look at the group as a whole, we can ensure that there aren't any material misstatements that have gone unidentified, either singularity or an aggregate. Bit of a brief outline on page 12 of sort of our plan. So we're working towards having everything to this committee in July of 2021, and we've outlined from that sort of when we plan to do a number of our procedures and complete our audit work to enable us to meet that date. There is a new auditing standard this year. It deals with how we document and approach auditing estimates. There are some key estimates within the HRM financial statements that we will need to apply this to. We don't think these are going to be a significant amount of time for us to deal with the change in the standard, but there will be some incremental time as the standard has now gets into a very granular level as to how we would assess and document our approach to an estimate, which is down to all the different components that really go into an estimate, including the method being used to determine the estimate, the data that is being used to be applied to the method, and any key assumptions that need to be made in developing the estimate at the end of the day. Fees are put in there. We have discussed with management the fact that there may be an incremental cost for us to apply the new standard. We've put in a small range. Certainly we'll work with management to make that as minimal as possible. However, not knowing the degree of work that we'll need to do until we actually get in there and do it, we will certainly update the management with respect to that as we go along. The other fees are as contracted in the RFP. So the appendices are there for your information. There's Appendix 4 gives a little bit of audit and assurance insights that's more general knowledge for the committee members, and a little bit more about our approach in Appendix 2 and really what we're required to communicate through our professional standards in Appendix 1 and how we achieve those required communications are there for your reading pleasure. But I'll stop there, see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. I was just going to interrupt and mention that it looked like we were one slide off. There was one slide that was Independence Matters, which sent the sequencing off a little bit. So thank you very much for your presentation. We have heard from Claude, and Claude was having technical issues. He has rejoined since then. And he is joining us by phone. So good morning, Claude. I see that you're on mute. As usual with these online committees, please indicate in the chat if you would like to speak. Because Claude is joining us over the phone, and Councillor Hansby, I see that you're there. I'll add you to the list as well. Claude, I would like to ask you first if you have any questions, but even before that, I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself to the committee and provide a little background on yourself.
So Claude, this is Anna here. I have prompted you to unmute. You should receive that auditory prompt and then press *6. And there you go. Now you're good, Claude.
Good. Thank you very much, Chair. My question to Terry was really as it relates to the systems of internal control in terms of their audit approach. How does it deal with looking at those and providing information back to the audit committee and the finance and audit committee about the adequacy of the controls?
Great. No, that's a good question, and a common question that we get. The purpose of the financial statement audit, as you're aware, would be not to assess internal controls, but to attain appropriate evidence that there aren't material misstatements in the financial statements. With respect to internal controls, there are professional standards when you perform an audit that require you to communicate certain matters to the audit committee or those charged with governance. And those would be any significant deficiencies we've identified in internal controls. The primary responsibility of the auditor is to gain sufficient understanding of the working of internal controls to appropriately assess audit risk, which is really to determine the in the significant areas the design and implementation of internal controls. In certain circumstances where we think it's appropriate, we would then also test the operating effectiveness of those controls, which is to perform procedures to ensure that the controls were working as intended throughout the reporting period. Those areas are typically limited to areas where it just practically could not be done without understanding or testing those controls, or we want to change the timing of our audit work, and to do so we need to better understand how controls are being applied over any period that maybe we did an interim cutoff at. And so in the context of the HRM, there's certainly any matters that we identify of significance are reported to this committee. Any matters that we identify that are maybe less significant or areas for improvement in internal controls, we have provided management with a management letter that outlines those areas and our recommendations for improvement. When it comes to testing of operating effectiveness of controls, I believe in our slides we point out the key area where we do spend some time doing that would be in payroll, where it's such a large balance that is processed throughout the year, and it's really a culmination of, literally hundreds of thousands of either payroll reports, hourly reports for hourly employees and others. We really feel that we need to understand those controls to effectively assess risk. And so anything that comes out of that, we certainly bring forward to management and other areas of risk. So one of the things that, and maybe this will preempt a question later on, but we don't rely on the Auditor General to perform any work for us. However, we do look to the Auditor General reports to help us identify whether there may be an area of concern or weakness in controls that we need to look deeper into to better assess our risk. And a good example of this would have been a number of years back where the Auditor General did a fairly detailed review of the procurement process and identified a number of potential risks around segregation of duties, and we have adopted our audit process to consider those risks and perform procedures that would either tell us that the controls are working as designed or are not properly designed, however, get audit evidence that nobody has circumvent or abused those control weaknesses that would cause material misstatements, obviously.
Okay, just a quick follow-up.
Yep.
The reporting of observations as a result of your audit with respect to deficiencies, I noticed that, I'm not sure when the last time the committee has received a management letter, but the indication is that there is a lower level or separate level of reporting to management on certain issues. I'm wondering about what's the nature of those types of matters, and why wouldn't they be promoted to the Audit and Finance Committee for at least for information purposes?
Well, I believe I can state that accurately that the last 2 years, I believe, we have not had any matters to report to management. So the letter that has gone to management has basically said we don't have anything to report. If those letters should be and available to the committee to review at any time, and should be CC'd to the committee, but they're so there's no real reason, I guess, Claude, or any particular answer to say that there's no professional obligation for me to report to you guys those matters, but by matter of practice, those letters should be CC'd to you. But there hasn't been any matters reported in the last 2 years that I'm aware.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that as well. Councillor Hensby.
Well, first of all, I want to welcome Claude. We worked together, Bridge Commission, and glad to see that he's joined our audit and finance process. I had a question on page 10 of the report. I think it is the page 11, the materiality columns. So if I read this right, you said the benchmarks are, am I reading this right? We have 1 billion and 50 million in total expenses for the year. Am I reading that right? And then the other one is the total estimate of the total assets for the year is 2,618 million. Am I reading that number correctly?
You're right. Yep.
So it is the billion. I wasn't sure if those are supposed to be commas or dots. I'm glad to see that they are commas. Just out of curiosity, with your comments about the Auditor General's office, is there anybody from the Auditor General's office here today in our committee reviewing this report?
I don't believe there is, but I would leave that to Ms. Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So no, the Auditor General wouldn't be involved in this committee. This is certainly, the audit committee is for the external auditor with KPMG. And just one thing on your question, Councillor, about the benchmarks and the $1 billion in expenses, as Carrie had pointed out, that's based on PSAB under accounting. Under general rate surplus, our expenses will be a little bit lower, so our budget will not match exactly with that amount.
All right, but this audit report goes to our own Auditor General just for as an information report to her, as I assume.
She would see the audited financial statements, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for any other questions. If anybody else has anything, please signify that in the chat. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions. One of them, and I can either step down from the chair and ask Councillor Daigle-Gammon to assume the chair, or I can speak from the chair if there are no objections.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at page 7. You had talked about the transactions that were overridden by management. And I'm wondering, are those transactions flagged? Is there some sort of indication somewhere that says that an override has happened?
There would be no specific flagging within the HRM. I mean, the purpose of this risk is really to identify areas or potential areas where management may go outside of internal controls, which would mean there wouldn't be, they basically go undetected unless you were looking for them. So what we do and what we are required to do under the professional standards is we obtain a listing of every entry that is made to the accounting system for the fiscal year, and then using some tools that we have, obviously, to scan or to analyze those entries, we look for specific characteristics. So one may be entries being made on a Sunday, or entries that are made by, again, and not proposing that this would be something that we actually look at, but that we ever find anything, an entry that's made by Jane, who typically never makes a journal entry. So we look at, why would Jane go ahead and make a journal entry? So we do our own flagging through setting some parameters within the data analysis systems that we use over the journal entries.
Okay. In other entities, have you seen some type of flag set as far as there has been an override by management, not following a normal process? Or
what I have seen, it would typically be there be flags set more at the middle level of management. So again, this is really designed for those folks that are at the top. In the other, potential form of override would be through, for lack of a better way to pull it, through pulling rank and telling somebody to do something, and that person doing it, not knowing that they're covering the track
for someone else.
Yeah. And they do that through fear of job loss or wanting to appease them. So we do any procedures that we do, we when we get into sort of that middle management and those clerical level areas, one of the questions that we're prompted to ask every time is, in performing your duties, were you ever uncomfortable? Did you ever feel pressured to do something that didn't seem right, and do that under sort of the confidence of us as an independent auditor, as opposed to somebody who's working for management.
Okay, thank you. Jumping down to page 18 and 19, basically, if you identify a gap in a process, whatever it is, then will you help us understand what that gap is and how to respond to that gap and how to correct it?
Yes, no, that is where we find potential areas of weakness in your processes. We certainly bring the attention of management and provide recommendations. The first thing we would do, though, to be clear, is if we found a process lacking a control, we would look to see if there are any other compensating controls, either later on in the process or through a management review, that would appropriately address that weakness. And certainly those are the things that bear into our understanding of how significant a control weakness is one, what's the potential quantum of error that could occur because there's a weakness in the controls, after considering compensating controls or controls that may exist later on in the process that were there to catch any inadvertent errors that were made earlier in the process. So we certainly flag those, bring those to the attention, and provide a recommendation as to what we think could be done, but leave that obviously to management to further consider and either address through their own comments.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Blair. Just a quick question. So in the planning report, Appendix 2, I've been on audit committees on a few boards now, and this is new to me. And I apologize. I had to step out for a couple of seconds while I was chatting with a constituent on the phone. So I may have missed this in your presentation. I'm not sure. But under the collaboration in the audit, you talked about a dedicated KPMG audit homepage, giving you real-time access to information, insights, and alerts from your engagement team. Can you just speak a little bit more about that? Like when will that be set up? Is that sort of is that for management? Is that for the committee? Is that what kind of information would be on there?
Yeah, sure. That would be, so we currently don't use that platform or a more simplified, I'll say, version of that platform with the HRM. And the rationale is very simple. The current platform that the more robust tool is on is not housed in Canada, so we don't want to store any information outside of Canada related to the HRM per our terms and conditions of our engagement. But that will be migrating to Canada within the next 2 years. And that platform is really just a portal, I guess would be the best way to describe it, whereby we would upload our requirements list that we have of management that we provide every year. There would be the ability for management then to upload any information to meet those requirements that we've asked for. We're able to set, due dates, able to track what's outstanding, and management will be given access effectively to that portal, into that information as well, to see the progress of the engagement and to see what's outstanding themselves, so that everybody is aware of what is being done. And there are a number of other just really what I would call effective project management tools sort of embedded in there that would allow us to set alerts, for example, of due dates as to when we expected to receive things, alerts as to when things have been uploaded, so our team knows to go and grab that information and start to work on it.
It's very intriguing, but as you say, it's not going to apply to
no,
us
what we effectively use right now is a secure share file site that we have internally that we invite management to be part of, and they can upload information to it. We can upload information to it, and we do set alerts so that we know when things have been uploaded to that, which is effectively an in-house, a KPMG in-house Dropbox setup.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Jacob Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering about on, I believe it's page 5. So the non-significant untested, the 16 sort of, and it looks like mostly it's associations. And I know that it, materially doesn't fall under the scope, but would I be correct in understanding that those associations would have done some kind of a review engagement report or some kind of an annual audit that gets rolled up into an annual report there?
Yes, no, that would be my understanding. I believe a few of them, and this would be part of the procedures we do over the consolidation. So I can tell you that we've been engaged, by way of example, to audit the Zatzman Sportsplex,
Right.
Centennial Arena, St. Margaret's Bay Arena. So those do have audits performed. We just don't necessarily rely on those audits because each individual one is not that significant, obviously below 10% of the total expenditures. And in aggregate, they don't add up to really a significant amount, right. Which again, I believe they don't add up to more than 10% of the total expenditures. So the consolidation process, though, would involve management having received a set of audited financial statements for the majority of those organizations, because they would be instructed to do so, but also, and they would be available. I believe some of them are if I'm not mistaken, effectively run on an operating budget that is equal to the grants provided by the HRM, some of the smaller business associations,
right.
Or the monies that have been set aside. So they just go under the assumption that they've spent all the money that you've provided to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, to a little bit more information for the councillor. So on the agreements that we have with the bids, we have actually changed it to move from requiring a full audit on an annual basis to an audit review. However, we do have the ability to go in and ask them to conduct a full audit. And the reason for this is that an audit's very intensive and it was quite expensive for them to do. And as Carrie said, majority of their funding comes from us. And we have other ways to manage that. So that would be the way that we would ensure that the municipality's assets are safeguarded and the funds are being used as intended.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see anybody else who has put the name forward in the chat. At this point, I would like to, I would appreciate it if someone could put the motion on the floor, and I can paste the motion into the chat.
I can do that, Mr. Chair, if you like.
Okay, thank you.
So I move that the audit committee approve the audit plan as set out in the March 3rd, 2021 report and recommendation to the audit committee for the 2020-21 year-end audit of HRM's consolidated financial statements, general rate surplus statements, and miscellaneous trust fund statements as prepared by the municipal auditor, KPMG.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I have a seconder for that?
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Are there any further questions on that? Okay. In that case, I'm going to call for the question. I think I can do this just by voice. So all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That motion passes. We are on to the next item, which is the in-camera item, and there is nothing. The date of the next meeting. The next meeting will likely take place in July or August, but it's at the discretion of Finance and Asset Management. And we will certainly be giving due notice of that meeting. And that brings us to the end of the Audit Committee. So if I could have a motion to adjourn, please, and then we will transition into the Audit and Finance Committee.
So moved.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. The Audit Committee is adjourned. Again, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Claude, for your participation in this. I appreciate it very much. Over to the clerk for a second. Do we need to do anything or go anywhere, or do we stay here?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. No, we are good to stay in this meeting for the transition to the Standing Committee of Audit and Finance. I will just let the members, our citizen members of the Audit Committee know that as you are no longer members of the committee to come, you are more than welcome to sit and observe, but will not be able to participate in the proceedings of the meeting. But whenever you are ready to go, Mr. Chair, we can proceed with beginning Audit and Finance. I
am good to go. Thank you very much. So I'd like to call to order the March 25th meeting of the Audit and Finance Standing Committee. And we have the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of February 11th, 2021. So could I have someone please move the minutes of February 11th, 2021?
I so move.
Councillor Purdy, thank you very much. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Cleary, thank you. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of the minutes of February 11th, 2021, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Great, those minutes pass. Approval of the order of business and additions and deletions. And this is over to the clerk for a minute.
Hello, everyone. So we have received unanimous consent for the addition of item 15.1, and that is going to be a report from Parks and Rec. We have not yet received unanimous consent for an addition for item 15.2, which is a report from Fire and Emergency Services. So I will leave it to the chair to put forward that motion for unanimous consent.
Okay, thank you. So 15.1, which is the revised Administrative Order 2014-020-Gov, respecting marketing levy special event reserve grants, would be added to the agenda. And 15.2, analysis and predictive modeling tools, budget increase. Question to the clerk, do we have all of the members of the Audit and Finance Committee online with us today?
I'll just do a quick check here, but I believe we do. Perhaps it would be prudent to do a general recorded vote if you would like, Mr. Chair, but looking at the list here, I think we are good.
Okay. Yes, I would prefer to do a recorded vote for this one because it does require unanimous consent.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Clear. I'd be happy
Yes,
to move an amendment to our agenda that we add 15.2.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Cleary. And do I have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Councillor Hensby, thank you. So over to the clerk, would you mind running through the roll?
My pleasure. All right. For the motion, we have Councillor Hensby,
Affirmative.
Councillor Purdy,
Voting in favor.
Councillor Cleary,
Yes.
Councillor Morse,
In favor.
Councillor Diggle-Gammon,
Voting in favor.
and Councillor Russell.
In favor? And so 15.2 would be added.
My apologies.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, I jumped in. I'm sorry.
All good. I have missed the mayor.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that is unanimous.
Thank you very much. So we have 15.1 and 15.2 added to the agenda. So are there any comments, any further additions or deletions to the amended agenda? All those in favor of the amended agenda and order of business, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Wonderful. Thank you. We have our marching orders for this meeting. Where are we now? We are at business arising from the minutes. And there is none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. And hearing none, we have motions of reconsideration and there are none. Motions of rescission are none. Consideration of deferred business is none. Notices of tabled matters is none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Over to the clerk. Have we received any correspondence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have received no correspondence.
Okay, thank you. And petitions.
We have received no petitions.
Wonderful. Thank you. And presentations, there are none. Information items brought forward, there are none. Reports from the Auditor General, there is not one today. And the investment activities, this is item 12.2.1. And so I'm going to hand it over to Vicki Robertson. Go ahead, Vicki, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, Vicki.
I was expecting a motion on that first and then for questions.
Questions, exactly. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Clear. I'd be happy to put that motion on the floor.
Go ahead, sir.
I move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee forward the March 8, 2021 report to Halifax Regional Council as an information item.
Thank you. A seconder, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. And so at this point, are there any questions or is there a presentation from Ms. Robertson?
Just to confirm, there is no presentation, but I am here to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. And I don't see any questions in the chat. I don't see anybody who has raised their hand. So all those in favor of forwarding the report to council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you very much. Item 12.2.2, write-off of uncollectible accounts. Once again, let's go for a motion first. So if somebody would like to put the motion on the floor, and I can paste that motion into the chat if you don't have it handy.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary. I would
Yes,
move
sir.
that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee, one, forward the January 13th, 2021 report to Halifax Regional Council for approval. Two, forward the private and confidential in-camera report write-off of uncollectible account details to HRM Regional Council as an in-camera information report, and that the report not be released to the public. Three, recommend to Halifax Regional Council that A, the real property accounts in the amount of $3,246.72, comprised of $2,808.21 principal and $438.51 interest, as summarized in Schedule 1, be formally written off out of the book of account. B, the general revenue accounts in the amount of $8,789.65, comprised of $75, $60, and 97 cents principal, and $12, $28, and 68 cents interest, as summarized in Schedule 1, be formally written out of the book of account. C, the recreation accounts in the amount of $255.54, comprised of $255.54 principal and zero interest, as summarized in Schedule 1, be formally written out of the books of account.
And so that's been moved. Can I have a seconder, please?
Seconded, Daigle Gammon.
Councillor Daigle Gammon, thank you very much. Are there any questions? And please signify by that in the chat. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Just a very quick one. And I was hard to see because in looking at previous years, I didn't see dollar amounts in the report, only a percentage. And so I found this, to be honest, very low in terms of write-offs. So is this a typical amount for us, or is it low because, for example, we went, I don't want to say extraordinary lengths, but went to great lengths, for example, with property tax collections to not really collect them, to give people the opportunity to pay them off. So I guess, is this what we would normally expect, or is this on the lower side?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, Vicki Robertson, Deputy Treasurer. This is a little bit lower. You are correct, Councillor Cleary. The reasons for this primarily relate to our general revenue, because we have had fewer events happening. We've had fewer general revenue bookings, which is typically where we would see these kinds of write-offs. For properties, we actually see fairly low write-offs because we do have the ability to take properties to tax sale. And also with recreation, we would typically see a little bit more with recreation. We've had two mitigating things happen. One obviously is COVID. We've had fewer recreation programs, and with the new software that's been installed, we are seeing less ability for people to avoid paying. They have to pay up front primarily, and if they don't pay up front, then they cannot partake. So generally, it's COVID that has certainly reduced a lot of it. To your point about the property taxes, again, I don't know if this is much lower than previous years, but again, we would typically take anything to do with taxes to tax sale. The ones that are in this particular report are the exceptions to the rule where we cannot.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Not seeing any. I'd like to call for the question. So all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Wonderful, that motion carries. The item 13, motions, there are none. We do have the approval of the in-camera minutes from February 11th, 2021. I see the clerk has raised her hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I just had a quick clarification. I missed it there. The person who had seconded item 12.2. I have the mover, but I do not have a seconder.
I believe that was Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have, I just scrolled off it for a second. There we are, 14.1, the approval of the in-camera minutes from February 11th, 2021. Would somebody be interested in moving the in-camera minutes from February 11th, 2021?
I'll move those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy, and do we have any need to go in camera and discuss those minutes?
Call a question.
Okay. All those in favor of the minutes, the in-camera minutes from February 11th, 2021, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Wonderful. Those minutes carry. Item 14.2, if I'm not mistaken, this related to 12.2.2 and was the detail on it, but my memory is slipping right now.
It is the detail. Yeah, that's all it was.
Okay. Thank you. In that case, we are on to item 15.1, the revised administrative order 2014-020-gov respecting marketing levy special event reserve grants. So would somebody like to put that motion on the floor, please?
I can do that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
I move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council adopt the amendments to the Administrative Order 2014-020-gov respecting marketing level special event reserve grants as set out in attachment 2 of the November 18th, 2020 report. I so move.
Super, thank you. And can I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second it. Councillor Morse.
Councillor Morse, thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Thank you very much. I just have one question, and I understand the rationale to go from 3 years to 5 years. There is one point in the terms of reference that I just wondered about, and I think it's 4.C1V, and it's just whether or not it should be 5 consecutive years. And then the other question would be, having learned from the pandemic, would we have an interruption clause?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Elizabeth Taylor, Manager, Culture and Events. Thank you very much for the question, Councillor. You mentioned it was 4.
I'm going to try to open it again. I think it was in the terms of reference.
I do take your point about the interruption clause. I think that's actually a very good idea. We could add that with a motion. That would be no problem. And yes, I think it's known that it's consecutive, but we could also add consecutive 5 years.
Thank you. And if I may, I have one more question.
Of course.
And it was just at Regional Council, there was a conversation on the terms of reference for Audit and Finance about whether or not the chair of the Special Events Committee needed to be appointed by Audit and Finance. So I wasn't sure if that conversation belongs here, or do we wait until there's a staff report that looks at that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, you would wait for the staff report. We'll be returning with a report for you on that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, Councillor Daigle Gammon, are you making a motion to amend the administrative order, or to A, request that it is 5 consecutive years, and B, add the comment about an interrupter clause?
Well, that would be just wonderful, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary. Just on that, so for the interrupter clause, obviously the word consecutive is easy. For the interrupter clause, would that require, I believe, best to supplementary report coming back with some information about what that would look like and the impact? And I would second that, by the way.
Okay, thank you.
And on that point, with interrupter clause, is that just for a declared state of emergency by the province, or would that also include possibly the municipality? Just to clarify those points.
I would think that would be in the staff report that comes back.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. We can consider both and return with additional information as a subsequent report.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Daigle Gammon, are you, or have you worked with the clerk or Ms. Taylor to put together the wording of that motion?
I would very much appreciate some support in the wording of the motion, Elizabeth, if that's possible.
Of course.
Wonderful.
And are there any further questions or comments on that motion about the interrupter clause or 5 consecutive years? Okay. Seeing no further questions, all in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. I believe that means that we cannot pass this main motion because that would, because therefore we would be accepting an incomplete product. So this would have to go back and we would have to wait for the staff report to come back. So with that, are there any further comments on 15.1?
Do you want a motion to table this until the other thing comes back, or should we just refer this as is and tell council that we anticipate an amendment to this to come forward?
We can do either. I have a personal preference, but I'll leave that out.
Because I think the consecutive is an easy amendment to make, but in regards to the interrupter clause, I personally think that may be something that we may want to consider for all our standing committees and citizens committees that it should ever occur. It should be across the board, not just for this particular committee, but for all of our committees.
So Councillor Hensby, would you be looking to move this forward until the staff report comes?
Well, I think we make the amendment. I think we make the amendment about the consecutive 5 years. I think that's an easy amendment to make, so we can move that forward and just move the whole report forward, and then we'll anticipate the report to come back about the interrupter clause. But like I said, I think it's not just for this terms of reference. I think it should be put in all of our terms of reference for future consideration.
So the previous motion was for the interrupter clause and the consecutive 5 years, and the staff report to come back for both of that. So they
can we break the motion? Can we break the motion in two then, and just pass one and defer the other one, or just pass on to staff?
Hi, this Simon Ross Siegel just jumping in for a moment. I believe since we have already voted on the previous amendment, if there's a desire to change things, I think we really should take a pause and briefly consult in order to make sure that we are capturing correctly what the intention of Audit and Finance Committee is at this time.
Okay. So Simon, how would you suggest we proceed with that? Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what might be the easiest way, since we have an understanding of what we're trying to do, but we don't have the actual wording for the motion that we passed, is to consider the amendment. If you were to word it, the amendment for consecutive would just be simply to add the word.
Yes.
And then a second part of that motion would be for the supplemental report on an interrupter clause, which could come back. It doesn't have to delay the amended administrative order, because once we put consecutive, then that's done. The report could, supplemental report could then come back on the interrupter clause. And if Councillor Hensby wants either for here or at council to move it for all other committees, then that would give us some information to make that change if we decided to, but it wouldn't have to slow down the admin order going forward with just simply one simple change of adding the word consecutive. So I would look to our solicitor and to Simon for that, but it wouldn't seem to me that we would have to slow down and stop just because we're waiting for some information on something that we may or may not do on this particular admin order.
I agree, and I would look to our solicitor as well. I just wanted to make sure we were following due process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, we are.
Great, thank you. It really depends on what the committee's intention is. If the committee would like to move an interrupter clause with the amendment package that they have, then I probably would suggest a supplementary report come back, and the committee can move it all together, move forward with the whole package together. If the committee is interested in just moving forward with the one amendment, the word consecutive, that can be done. However, it may be a little problematic to move an interrupter clause at the same time that that matter goes forward. And in listening to, I believe it was Councillor Hensby's interest in looking at it for all committees, that would have to come from regional council. That would be a motion. So this committee couldn't do that. So it's up to the committee, but the supplementary report would probably achieve both things at the same time. And I'm not sure about the timing. I'm not sure if there's a staff member who might be able to provide you with a timing that supplementary report could come back.
Okay, thank you. Where we have already voted on the single motion that combines the two of them. It sounds like there is interest in having both of those items proceed.
So can we do a motion of reconsideration just to split the two and then move forward with one and then ask for supplementary report on the other?
I believe a motion of reconsideration would have to come to the next meeting, which would delay in any case, I believe, the process.
I believe the administrative order, reconsideration can be done immediately after a vote has been done.
I believe can. I would have to check.
I may be wrong. I think then in that case, we should pause for 5 minutes to consult our solicitor and just organize ourselves here.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's reconvene at 11:20. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome back, everybody. It is now 20 after 11. And I'm wondering, are we ready to proceed? Do we have that motion crafted, and do we have a way to go forward? And I'm looking at the solicitor at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've had an opportunity to look at the rules A01 and in particular section 61 on motions of reconsideration. Well, the councillor could certainly bring forward the motion today for reconsideration. However, the rule provides that the motion of reconsideration is held over to be dealt with at the first order of business at the next meeting. So that would be the normal procedure. There is a section in section 61 which provides that with a vote of 2/3 of the members present and voting, they may agree to take up the motion of reconsideration at the same meeting in which the matter was decided. So 2/3 would be required. Otherwise, the matter goes forward to the next meeting of the committee. And my understanding is that the committee has voted for a supplementary report on both of those items to come forward.
I believe that's the case. Councillor Daigle-Gammon, I would look to you for some direction.
So the intention was for it to be 5 consecutive years. And then because of COVID and what we've learned, that we would also have an interrupter clause, therefore allowing, if it wasn't consecutive, that they would still be able to have their funding. So that was the intention that I started with. And so if we can do a motion to reconsider and then break out the one issue being consecutive, vote on just the consecutive to be included, and then afterwards ask for a supplementary report for an interrupter clause, how that could be applied, then that actually would satisfy, I believe.
Thank you. So with a motion of reconsideration and it requiring 2/3, we would need a named vote just to make sure that we have the counts of the members as appropriate. So I'm going to hand it over to the clerk.
So, Mr. Chair,
nobody has made that motion.
Would I have to make a motion of reconsideration then, sir?
I believe so, yes.
And I would like to make a motion to reconsider the previous motion that was duly seconded and passed.
Thank you. And do we need a seconder? Councillor Cleary? Thank you very much.
And we need 4 out of 5 to meet that threshold of 2/3.
We need 4 out of 6. The mayor is also a member, but the mayor is not with us.
The mayor, yes. Okay, well.
The mayor has had to leave for another engagement. So over to the clerk to call the roll, please.
Alrighty, thank you, everyone. So on the motion, Councillor Hensby.
For the motion.
Councillor Purdy.
Or yes.
Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
Councillor Morse.
Yes.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
In favor.
And Mr. Chair.
In favor. And so that that certainly passes. So that motion did not exist. We can put it back on the floor. Councillor Daigle-Gammon, the floor is yours.
So I would move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee request a supplementary staff report to examine options to add in an interrupter clause.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Hensby. Is there any discussion on the motion to add an interrupter clause? And seeing none, all in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. And Councillor Daigle-Gammon, your second motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually did this backwards, didn't I? I would ask that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee requests that the term consecutive be used in Article 4.c 1B to say consecutive 5 years.
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is there any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Great, thank you. And we are back on the main motion then. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Great, thank you. In that case, all in favor of the main motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Wonderful. That motion passes. We're on to 15.2, the analysis and predictive modeling tools budget increase. Can I have someone put the motion on the floor, please? And I will paste the motion into the chat.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary. I would move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee approve the transfer of $37,000 from capital project CE 2000004- fire services equipment replacement to capital project C. Is that a one? No, it's an I. CI 990021 data management.
Second it.
Thank you. Councillor Hensby for seconding that. Is there any discussion on the motion? And I'm wondering if Chief Stubing and Deputy Chief Meldrum have a presentation for us.
Hello, Mr. Chair. It's Ken Stubing. Deputy Chief Meldrum is online and has been leading this initiative, so I'll ask him to speak to your questions and speak on the information in front of you.
Thank you, Chief Stubing.
Thank you. I don't see any questions coming in the chat. If you would like to ask a question, please indicate that in the chat. In the meantime, I am curious if last night I had sent around an email in looking at this, and I was wondering about the list of responses to this proposal that was received. And I'm just wondering if that could be sent out to the committee. And do we have to move in camera if there is any discussion on that?
So if I may, Mr. Chair, it's Deputy Chief Meldrum present. Certainly what I can share with the committee is that we put this RFP out to market in December of 2020. We had 5 proponents put forward proposals, and through a competitive process with procurement and assessment by both fire staff and ICT staff, one recommended proponent has come forward. This recommendation arises from the fact that the funding source we had identified doesn't meet the required funding to move further in the procurement process. So there are 5. One is recommended. I would respectfully ask for direction perhaps from legal or the CFO with regard to what further information should be provided at this time, given that we're still in an open and procurement process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the fact that the procurement's still open, I would recommend that that would be the only update that's given until such time as the contract's concluded.
Okay, thank you very much. Wondering if there are any further questions. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
And this may not be a fair question, just in regards to the tender not being awarded yet, but what is the time frame like here? So will the data that you're inputting and then the modeling that comes out of it be available at what time frame? Like before next budget year, or will you be using these to make decisions around, as you've discussed previously, the location of stations, those kind of things? And obviously, that's going to have a longer term runway for those kind of things. So, what's the time frame for actually getting the modeling out of this? And maybe you don't know that yet until the tender closes. Because I guess a proponent may have different timelines. But do you have a timeline in mind, either Deputy Chief Meldrum or to Mr. Stubing through you, Mr. Chair?
It looks like Chief Stubing has frozen. So go ahead, Deputy Chief Meldrum.
Maybe they had to go to a fire call.
They may have had to. We're not seeing any responses from
this is Simon here. I believe a couple of people, including Annie, have recently just been frozen. So just wait just a moment, or hopefully we can get some answers shortly.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We have also lost a solicitor and the CFO.
I'm just receiving a note that the internet has cut out at City Hall entirely, I believe.
That's an interrupter clause.
I'm at City Hall. I don't think I'm connected to the internet though. I don't know how to...
Just a moment. We will.
Simon,
Simon,
I'm going to request a 5-minute break.
I think that's a wise idea. Let me put up the break screen.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's reconvene at 11:40. Good morning and welcome back. It's 11:41. We have been having internet issues. A number of people were booted from the session, and we are looking into that issue at this point. Nearly everybody has rejoined this meeting, so I would like to proceed. I think we are still looking for one or two people who aren't in the meeting yet. So hopefully they will be able to join us soon. Where were we?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Fire department.
I believe we were. I believe we were.
It was my
looking for a
question. I was
response.
simply asking. Yeah, I don't know if.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
I see Chief Steubing on there. Chief, can you hear me?
I can, Councillor. Go ahead.
My question, I won't repeat the whole thing, but the short version was, with the modeling, so even though the tender hasn't closed, do you have a timeline on when you're hoping to see the modeling and when that might start impacting your decision around things like location and infrastructure and that kind of thing? Hoping to get the data.
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Good question. Immediately would be a pretty good answer. So as you know, we're on this journey of data-driven decision-making and being able to provide information to council through measurements of data and key performance indicators to help, as outlined in our administrative order, to help council understand how we're doing with our resources. But obviously those resources are based out of stations. So the goal would be to not only improve our knowledge as it pertains to what KPIs are, industry best practices, what KPIs that we should be able to measure with the data that we have, also information on what data we should start to be collecting and what processes to do that. But as far as the timing goes, it will never end once we have this information, but our goal is to get that information in front of council this year, particularly as it pertains to some of the challenges around Station 8 and 9, Bedford and Sackville, as well as some of those other areas that we shared in our information to council during the budget session around Spryfield and the Eastern Passage area. So we want to make sure that not only are our stations in the right locations, but where we have staff. So what I mean by that is there are some stations where we have more than just one truck of 4 firefighters, where we might have a tactical unit or an aerial, and we want to know if we're deploying those units in the right location. So it's not only getting access to an industry expert on what we should be measuring and what we have that can help us understand our capabilities, but also informing us for future decisions. So predictive modeling, so we can get out in front of this growth issue. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Not seeing any. Okay. All in favor of the motion then, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, signify by saying nay. Great, the motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. Notices of motion. There are none listed. I'm just looking, I don't see an agenda item for people to be able to bring notices of motion forward. That's curious. Date of the next meeting is the 21st of April, 2021. And so with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Councillor Daigle Gammon. Great, thank you very much. We stand adjourned. Have a great day, everybody. We'll